you can learn the software quite easily if you're that way inclined. If you understand computers, you can learn the software in your own time whenever you want. You don't, that's the sort of the easy part. The hard part is sort of being on set, and that's why we're big believers in just getting out there and doing it from a trainee level, and learning on the job.
So thank you for coming to today's session, for the high-end TV session on data management for high-end, which is back to basics. For those of you who know about ScreenSkills, we're the UK skills body, and we work across film, TV, games, and VFX. So we really support the workforce with growth and developing. And this session in particular is funded by the High-End TV Skills Fund, working across high-end TV drama, but also we cover comedy and also high-level documentaries as well. So I'm really, really pleased today that we've pulled this session together, working really closely with Sam and Callum at Digital Orchard. So I'm going to pass you over to Sam, who's going to give you a bit more of an introduction about who Digital Orchard are and today's session.
Thank you very much. So yeah, my name's Sam. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Orchard. For those of you that don't know, Digital Orchard is a post-production facility. We cover workflows from capture to post. So we began probably about sort of 10 years ago, something like that, as a DIT agency only. So we had data managers, data technicians, DITs, and a whole load of kit that we put out on jobs, from sort of high-end feature films to high-end TV drama to commercials, anything really. And we have grown from there to include Q-Take video playback services, so that's both technicians and equipment. And we then probably sort of three or 4 years ago added film services to our list as well. So we have film scanners, and we work closely with Kodak to scan sort of everything that they put through their processes. And then even more recently, a couple of years ago, we moved into full service picture post. So I think Callum will be able to talk more on all of those bits, but what we're focusing on today is obviously data management and the on-set side of the data workflow. So I'll hand over to Callum, who'll start talking. If anyone has any questions, do feel free to ask at any time. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat window, so if you want to put your question there, I'll try and keep track of it, and if it's a sort of appropriate moment, I'll try and either answer it myself or give it over to Callum. So yeah, over to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to everyone at ScreenSkills for having us. As Sam said, what we're going to be focusing on is the data management side of workflows, specifically looking at high-end TV drama, which, as Sam said, we've had a huge amount of experience over the last 10 years. And what we're going to do is look at a couple of things. So first of all, we're going to look at the roles and sort of rough responsibilities of the different sort of people involved in a workflow from the data side of things. So that's a DIT, a data wrangler, data manager, dailies colorists, dailies operators, and what's the difference between them, and what sort of job opportunities there are for people coming into them. Because the roles are very different. Some people work nights, some are on set, some are off set. So, and there are job roles in there that people don't really think about. When they think of data, they just think of DITs and that's it. So trying to sort of tease that out and learn the different roles is quite interesting. Then we're going to look at a sort of a typical high-end TV workflow. So I pulled a workflow from a big show we did in Wales last year. And we'll have a look through that from shooting the cameras, what we need to consider with that, through to our data backing up on set, going to the lab, pushing out all of our different files to editorial, to visual effects, and how that flows through all the way to the final DI. That'll probably take up the sort of majority of the time, but if we've got sort of time left over, we'll then go on to a few sort of little techie things that are really important when we're talking about data management. So that's hard drives, not the most interesting subject, but absolutely critical when it comes to data management, how we copy footage across and what software we use to do that in, and the paperwork. And I know that sounds absolutely thrilling, but it's one of the most important things to get all the paperwork done at the beginning, during, and at the end of the show. So EOS is end of show paperwork. And then at the end, a discussion sort of about progressing the career, and sort of the ways you can come into the industry, and a few sort of pointers as to where, you know, the best routes to start tackling things. In terms of questions, ask as you go along. As been said before, just type in your questions. Sam's going to be monitoring those through the next sort of 40 minutes. She'll sort of find the right times to interject with things. But if you've got anything, you can save them up to the end, and we'll go over everything there. So, the first thing that we're going to talk about is the difference between a DIT, a data manager, and a data wrangler. So they perform overlapping roles a lot of the time, and a lot of people think a DIT is one thing, and actually it's a much broader role. So you can see here there are 3 columns that a DIT would have to do, and 1 column that a data wrangler and a data manager will have to do. And just before we start then, the difference between a data manager and a data wrangler is really about sort of experience and seniority. So on really big shows where you need someone who's very experienced, you would have a data manager who would be at a slightly higher rate than a data wrangler, which is a bit more of a, what's the word, a sort of entry-level job. So you would do some trainee work and then become a data wrangler. So if we go through those columns there, the first thing, which is the thing most people think of straight off, is data management. So that's really straightforward in its basic form. It's about backing up all of our rushes, making sure that everything shot on camera is backed up to at least 2 hard drives, it's safely done, and it's done quickly, efficiently, and done in a way that we know everything's been copied across properly, all the reports have been done. And we'll come on to that a little bit later on when we look at the way we actually back stuff up. So that's it in its basic form. But along with data management, we also say that the data wranglers and the data managers would be in charge of making sure that there are enough mags on set, because that's sometimes a flashpoint of tension. Productions often want to bring on as few mags as possible because they're quite expensive to rent. So it's this role that needs to make sure that there's enough, that they're being reloaded regularly, that they're offloading the footage to hard drives quick enough, and that they're getting those mags back into circulation. So, it sounds like a small thing, but actually, if you've got no mags to shoot with, that's the end of your production for the day. So really important. Then we've got QCing. So QCing, which stands for quality control checks, is absolutely critical. So it's really important that when we shoot anything from a camera, someone needs to look at that in a critical form. So they're looking for, drop frames, any sort of digital noise. They're looking for sort of dead pixels. There's a list as long as anything of the things that you need to look out for. And these are things that, if found very quickly, can be resolved on set. So you could reshoot something, might need to fix a camera, you might need to replace a camera. And the issue is that if you don't pick these things up quickly, then often they don't actually get found all the way till the end, until you're doing your final DI or your final grade, because you will make very small compressed versions of your footage and send that to editorial. And it's not editorial's job to see a dead pixel or think that there's a problem with a light or something like that. So they might not flag something. and then you'll be 3-4 months down the line and you're not going to find where the problem was. So QCing should be done by someone with enough experience in a sort of controlled environment with proper monitors. And again, I've written a little list of sort of best QC practices, which is something that you guys can practice at home, really. So once we've done our QCing, we then need to transcode our footage. So this can be known, which is quite confusing, by a couple of names. So you could be creating the dailies, you could be doing your transcodes, you could be doing your renders, you could be making proxy files. All of those phrases mean the same thing. All we're doing is taking our master raw footage and we are rewrapping it into something that's smaller and more manageable for editorial or for VFX to do, to use within their systems. Now, sometimes that involves color. So it might be the case that a DIT will do some color work on it, or a simple look or a LUT is applied to those files, and that's passed on down the chain, but it doesn't have to mean that. So once we've done our transcodes, then we need to think about archiving. And archiving is a requirement of pretty much every single show that we're a part of. Certainly when we're talking about high-end TV drama, all the major studios require some form of archive. So whether that is LTOs, which are a tape-based form of media, whether that is going on several RAIDs, which are big hard drives with lots of spinning disks, so they've got redundancy built in, or whether that's to the cloud. These are different forms of archive, and that will all be worked out when we're doing our workflow with the studio. And then logs and reports. Really, really critical to make sure that every single action within your workflow has been logged, and your QC reports are all done, your verification reports, that everything's been transferred from the mag to your hard drive has been done. And really, what we always say to our technicians, and we've got something like 37 technicians at Digital Orchard that are going out on all sorts of jobs, is that the logs are your insurance policy. If something goes wrong further down the line, and for some reason production has to come back to you as a technician and say, well, this drive's corrupt, or this file's missing, or we don't have that bit of data. If you as a technician have got your logs, you can simply say, no, here it is, on this day I transferred this, and that's the proof that you got it, that you did your job right, and it's something that gets you out of trouble time and time again. So that's super important. So that first column you can see there, the data management side, I would expect that a DIT, a data wrangler, and a data manager all have those skills. Then coming on to the second and third column, these are skills that I would expect a full DIT to do. So the first column there, we've got on-set support. So camera maintenance. So your DIT should know all about the camera, every single setting within it. They should know or be able to find out very quickly what it does. They should know about things like firmware, different sort of unique accessories for that camera. So whether you're shooting with Alexas or Reds or Sony Venices or Minis or whatever it is, the DIT is the person there on set who is sort of the expert about those cameras. That's not to say that they're the only person that knows anything about them. It's important that DOPs have a very good knowledge, your focus puller knows what they're doing, and there might be other people in the crew that know them. But when push comes to shove, if there's a problem on set, it's more than likely that it would be the DIT that is the first in the firing line to try and fix the problem. So understanding your cameras, learning your cameras is super, super important. And that sort of goes in the flow of supporting crew. So that is working with focus pullers, working with loaders, working with other people on set, people like the sound department, people like video department, to make sure that the image is distributed properly on set, that everyone's looking at a correctly balanced picture, that should there be technical problems related to the camera, you're the one that can jump in and sort those out. And often just having a bunch of iPhone chargers on your cart is a very good way to support the crew as well. And then we've got DP monitoring and live grading, which are sort of the same thing, but you don't have to always live grade. So On a typical high-end TV show, you will have a video department, and that will have a video operator and maybe several video assists. They will bring the majority of the monitors to set. They'll be in charge of things like the wireless, getting picture from camera back to what we refer as Video Village. So that's where the DIT and the video department work out of. But it is the responsibility of the DIT to bring the monitors for the DOP. And that means that they need to be calibrated. They need to be set aside from everyone else so that the DOP has a sort of focused, quiet, usually in a blacked out tent, sort of critical environment to watch what's being produced on. So there's a big difference in the monitor type that a DOP would use and say a monitor that hair and makeup checks would use, or your continuity person, or even your director. So the best monitor on set will normally be reserved for the DOP, and that's because they're using it to make critical decisions about lighting and about focus and about camera movement. Live grading is then sort of feeds into that, and that's the idea that a DIT can color grade the picture live from the camera. So you can do this in all sorts of different ways, but generally speaking, a feed comes from the camera in what's known as a log format. It then goes into some sort of LUT box, and the DIT will then apply some sort of color grade to that, and the LUT box will then send that signal back out live. So everything that's coming straight from the camera will go through this processing box, be colored and have a look applied to it, and then everyone on set can see that. And the huge advantage of that is that we don't have to look at a sort of generic looking image. We can actually get to a place where, say we're shooting a Western, it can be a bit desaturated, or say we're shooting a sci-fi film, it can all be quite high contrasty. And that might mean that the DOP lights slightly differently, or that the camera moves slightly differently. There's all sorts of things that can feed into that. So we're finding that I would say the majority of high-end TV drama is live grading now. There are some shows that don't want to use it, and that's sometimes for cost reasons and sometimes for speed reasons. But what we've always said is, it's not a huge cost, and it shouldn't slow you down if you're doing it right. So that's the sort of on-set side of things, the on-set column. Then the third column is a little bit more vague, and this is really where you're paying for experience in a DIT. So the first thing is about setting up a workflow. So the most critical sort of starting point for any workflow is communication, and making sure that all the departments are brought in the loop and that everyone knows what's happening. And we'll look at a typical workflow next. But so it would be the role of the DIT to potentially write that, or potentially work with something like a post-production supervisor or a studio technician or a studio liaison person to put that workflow together. And how I've always seen it is, you are both working for the production and you're working for the DOP at that point. So you've got to have both in mind. So from the production's point of view, you want to make sure that everything's as cost effective as possible, that editorial are happy, the visual effects department are happy, that the final post house know what's going on. But you want to also make sure that the DOP's DOP's intentions are followed through as much as possible. And there's often points of tension there where, say, a DOP will want to shoot a higher resolution, or they might want to shoot raw, and there's pushback. So it's about, managing that. The other thing in that is about technical translating. And this is less of an issue now than it was when we sort of started coming into the industry 10 years ago. We were moving from film into this new scary world of digital, and that DOPs who've been working for 20, 30 years, suddenly a huge amount of their knowledge was thrown out, and they were presented with these new cameras and all these new words. So it's about understanding the digital technology and being able to translate that back into a film world. So when we're talking about, a DOP might say, well, that's quite grainy. Well, there are technical reasons why, you can say it's grainy, but it's not. It's noise. or something is overexposed but it's clipping, or we're crushing and it's underexposed. It's being able to translate those things. And then going forward, as DOPs have become more au fait with sort of the digital world, it's about keeping up with technology. It changes at such a rapid rate that, I've worked for 10 years. I worked on set for sort of 7 years as a DIT before coming off and focusing more on the post side of things. But, within that time, we had new cameras, every 6 months, there would be a new generation of something coming through, and keeping on top of that amount of information coming through is almost a full-time job in itself. And it's about constantly, learning all the time, so that when a DP comes and says, right, I've got this specific shot, what camera would be best for it? Or I'm having problems with a low lighting shot, what can I do? Can I boost the ISO, or can I change something? So understanding and knowledge is a huge amount of what you're paying for in a full sort of DIT. So you can see there are 3 very sort of distinct columns of work that need to be used. And as we said at the beginning of this slide, so the data management side of things, I expect a data manager and a data wrangler to handle that, whereas a DIT needs to be across all of that. And a DIT will be in charge of several data wranglers or a data manager, but it's the DIT's responsibility to make sure that all the data side of stuff is done correctly. So then we've got our dailies operator and dailies colorist, and these will start to make a bit more sense once we look at a workflow. But essentially, a dailies operator is doing a very similar job to a data manager or a data wrangler. They're just doing it offset. So they would work typically off production hours. So if the production started at 8 a.m. and finished at 7 p.m., a dailies operator would start at sort of lunchtime and work into the evening, or they might do a straight night shift. And this means that they can process all that footage much more effectively, because they're not waiting around on set for stuff to come in. So the idea would be that you've got a team on set, they would hand either a hard drive, a shuttle drive, or mags directly to an operator who would be based, potentially at the production office, who could be based at a facility like ours at Leavesden, or who could be based potentially, in a truck, but separate, sort of separate from set. And they would perform the same sort of steps. So they would QC everything, they would apply color, they would transcode, they would do all the archive stuff. But they're doing it in a much more sort of rigidized, sort of focused manner, in terms of all the mags are coming in all at the same time, a more concentrated sort of view of things, which means that they've got more time to spend on things like QCing and color. And that's where then the dailies colorist comes in. And it's really only on the sort of rarest of high-end TV jobs that a dailies colorist is involved, but the majority of high-end feature films will have a specific person who's just dedicated to do the color every single day on the rushes. And they would have, as it says, an input on the QCing. So if they see something, they'll feed that back to the dailies operator, who will feed that back to the QC report. And they will have a very close relationship with the DOP. So the dailies colorist would talk to the DOP pretty much every single day about what they've shot. And that color information will then flow straight into the post-production pipeline, which will, the intention is always to then start using that as a starting point for your final grade. So if there's no more questions on that, we'll sort of jump onto a workflow.
There was a previous question about, it says, what would you say the best point for the loader to change cards/codecs to avoid corruption? I'm not quite sure I understand what that means exactly.
No. Maybe whoever wrote that, do you want to just slightly elaborate on that, and we'll circle back round to that, of exactly what you mean. Okay, well, whilst we're sort of waiting on that, we'll tackle that.
Hold on one second. Sorry, it goes quite fast. So, and then someone else said, did dailies ever making edits, which I presume mean, do the dailies operators have anything to do with, do they edit at all? Was that correct, the person who asked that question?
So the answer to that would be no. But I think maybe what the question is do editorial ever make the dailies? Possibly. And the answer to that is very occasionally. There are shows that did it. Certainly there are examples. I believe Downton Abbey had a workflow like that, where editorial made the dailies. But it's becoming rarer and rarer because people are shooting more resolution and raw data, which means the sheer amount, the volume that needs processed is so high that editorial just don't have the capacity or generally the computers to do that.
So it's really about, I think he wanted to know, especially on commercials, that when producers want to see a sequence quickly edited, how's that dealt with? So I suppose, commercials is a slightly different thing.
It is a different thing. It wouldn't be normal to have your DIT do a cut. They potentially could do a cut if there's a technical reason for it, to check a matching of something, but in a creative terms, they're not there to edit. Video operators tend to all have editing experience, and most of the time on commercials, the editor will just come on set. So I've been on lots of commercials where I'm there and I'm feeding the editor who's sitting next to me the rushes straight away, because DITs aren't trained editors.
Yeah. So that other question about the changing the cards, it's about how much space is left on the card when you should take it to the DIT to avoid a bottleneck.
Yeah, so it's about managing the number of cards you've got. So the typical day for me when I was on set would be that I would make them reload, not make them, ask them politely to reload very early on in the day. So we would tend to shoot the first setup and then I would get them to reload so that I could check there was nothing wrong with the cameras. So I would have done my pre-shoot checks on all the cameras, but it's often good to shoot just one setup, get that in your system, make sure there's nothing wrong. It gives you something to start working with in terms of color. And then I would tend to leave them till lunch to fill up some mags. So, let them get shooting. You tend to shoot less in the morning anyway. So there might be one reload there, but I would never let a mag go over sort of half an hour. Something like that feels reasonable, half an hour, 40 minutes. And then when we get towards the end of the day, that's when reloading really starts ramping up. And my aim as a DIT, and this is what I tell all of our technicians who work on set, is that the last mag of the day should only really contain the last couple of setups, because otherwise the DIT or the data wrangler or manager has to sit there on set for an hour, 2 hours after wrap, coloring, transcoding, backing everything up. And we don't want that. Productions don't want that. They don't want to pay the overtime. So we try and avoid that as much as possible by reloading more regularly as we get towards the end of the day.
So there's another question about what grade are people who don't edit, but they do sync together the multiple cameras and sound with a portable Avid?
So I say that again?
So the question is, what grade are people who don't edit, but they do sync together the multiple cameras and sound with a portable Avid?
So generally, that would be an edit assistant. So there are occasions where DITs will be asked to make Avid bins. That tends to happen more on sort of feature films and slightly more complex workflows. But on a general high-end TV show, Avid isn't something that is used by, Avids aren't something used by DITs or data wranglers on set. So we do all of our syncing in our daily software, whether that's OSD or Scratch or Resolve. So we'll sync everything to sound there and then output, but that would be an edit assistant or an editor's job to sync to the multi-track and sync up cameras together.
One more question. What qualifies a person to work as a data wrangler?
So that's a very difficult question. There are no qualifications as such across our whole industry. So, anyone can rock up with a laptop and call themselves a DIT. Anyone can rock up with a laptop and call themselves a data wrangler or data manager. And they do. And it's a real problem. It's about training and knowledge, making sure that you're not going in under rate, making sure you're not going in with the wrong equipment. You know, the barrier to entry to these jobs is very low. You know, if you've got a decent spec laptop and the right software, you're good to go, you know. And essentially that's how I started in the industry. You know, I was a trainee, I then became a loader, and, you know, I came onto a job that needed a DIT, and I just picked up a laptop and some software and got on with it. So I've got nothing against people sort of coming in like that. The issue that we've always had, and that really hurts the industry, is people coming in and overstretching themselves. So people coming in, calling themselves DITs, who don't have the knowledge of workflows, don't have the color knowledge, sort of just trying to take as much money as they can, and just performing data wrangling work. So that's often the problem, is really data wranglers overselling themselves as DITs, and that hurts everyone.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to point out here would be that it's about having the relevant on-set experience in other areas as well. So because being on set is you know, such a specific discipline, yeah, set etiquette, as someone just pointed out, it's having that knowledge first. So as Callum said, yeah, he did step into sort of the data side of things, but he'd already been a trainee, he'd already been on the camera floor, and he knew all that side of things. So we find that you know, people who've had enough experience on the camera floor in the first instance, and then have the skill set that requires them to be good with, you know, the data side of things, there's no reason, there's no barrier then to sort of stepping in and being fantastic. So it's just a bit of a combination of a lot of things.
So let's move on to workflows. So what we've got here is a sort of fairly typical high-end TV budget workflow. So as I said before, this was taken off a show that we did last year, big budget show, American studio. And this is a fairly typical workflow for us. So what we've got here is we've got our A and our B camera. So high-end TV, I can't think of a show that hasn't shot on 2 cameras or more. They have to shoot very quickly. They shoot a lot a day. So often we factor for something like 3 hours of footage per camera per day. So in this case, we're shooting with Sony Venices in XOCN ST. So that's the sort of middle variant of the codec. So that means we are shooting RAW, but we're not shooting the absolute most amount of data that camera can shoot. We're shooting a sort of middle ground. And that was a long discussion with the DOP and the post-production team, because obviously the DOP wants to shoot as best quality as possible, but that creates a huge amount of data, and that's got a big cost in it. So we've got our cameras. They will shoot on their onboard mags. They will then be handed off to the DIT on set. The DIT in this case will be doing live grading, but they'll also be offloading that footage onto shuttle drives. So in this instance, we're using 2 terabyte little tiny SSD shuttle drives. I'm just looking around, can't see one in the room. And also backing up to a big RAID, so a big hard drive with lots of disks in it, with built-in redundancy. So at this point, we've got 2 copies, and that's always the key. Whenever we're moving data around, we're using 2 copies. Also importantly, we are checksumming across that footage, and we'll come on to checksumming in a minute, because it gets a little bit technical, but it's basically a specific bit of software that is used to copy media from a hard drive to another hard drive, or from a mag to a hard drive. So we've copied our media off the mags onto our hard drive and our shuttle drive. At that point, we're going to send our shuttle drive off to the lab. So in this instance, the shoot was based in Wales. So Digital Orchard has a Welsh facility down in the Bay Area, which is a lovely, lovely area. And we had a 2-people team, 2 people working off shift, and so we would have a split at lunchtime. So a shuttle drive would come at lunch to the lab, and they would start working on it. So they would offload that footage onto more RAIDs. They would then do all the QCing. They would do the transcodes. They would apply any color work from the DIT onto the rushes, and those rushes would then be distributed to editorial for them to start cutting with. they would be distributed to Pix, which is an online viewing platform where people can stream on an iPad. And they would be made ready for visual effects, but they'd also be backed up to LTO at that point. So that was being done at the lab stage. And only after all of that was done would the lab then give a clearance report to the DIT and say, we backed everything up, you're good to use the mags again. So in this workflow, the mags never actually left set, so the DIT held onto them the whole time, but they had to wait for clearance from the lab that everything was good to wipe and they were good to reuse. The other important thing here is the QC report. So the DIT on set would be doing a quick QC. Now, because the hustle and bustle of a working day, it's very difficult to QC everything properly. So they would do a very quick QC, whereas the lab would do a full, more rounded QC, write the QC report, and then distribute that out. And what the QC report is showing is any problems with anything. And most of the time what they would do is they would ring up the DOP and generally the first AC and just give them a heads up if anything's wrong, and then distribute that out to a pre-agreed list of people. So that is the sort of on-set side of things. And if we then look at our sort of typical workflow after that, what we've got is...
Callum, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Were the mags wiped before the OK comes back from the lab?
No, so it's the lab that gives that OK. So once the lab has done all their offloads, the full QC, and once the LTOs are made, at that point, the mags, they're not sent back to set, they're already on set, but at that point, clearance is given.
And how long was that in time?
So that was done by the next day because we were working an off-shift hour. So by, I can't remember what it was, by about 3 in the morning, the team in the lab had offloaded everything, sunk everything up, got everything onto LTO tape, and then that report was ready for the DIT to work on set by whatever it was, sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock. What we always suggest to productions is that they've got at least 2 to 2.5 days worth of mags on set. So if you're going to shoot 3 hours per camera per day, each mag, for instance, is only going to take an hour's worth of footage, then you need, 6, 7, 8 mags per camera, which isn't unreasonable. And that means that should something go wrong in the lab, should the lab, not get through everything, the DIT has got enough mags to keep reusing. And then should something go wrong again, there's enough time to bring in more mags from a rental house in the worst case scenario. So if we look here at more broadly the workflow then, so we've looked at acquisition, so that's capturing, our transfer, our backing up our archive, all of that. So once we've done that, we then need to get our footage to editorial. Editorial will cut that all together, whether that be in an Avid or Premiere, but they will cut it. They will then create an EDL from that cut. So that's an edit decision list. And all that is a little tiny file that says all the cut points in it. They'll then send that to the post-production facility. So if we were doing post on that, they send that to us and we sit and relink that to the master footage. So the idea is we've gone from these small transcoded dailies back to our raw footage type. And at that point, we will then do our full color grade on it. So it's a very straightforward workflow, and it doesn't tend to deviate show to show. There are just little hitches always in the way. So, where the DIT can be, where the lab's going to be placed, things like that. Now, the other thing to say is this is sort of the higher end of high-end TV drama. There is high-end TV drama work where they want to compress this and they want everything done on set. Now, in those instances, the lab functionality would be done by a data wrangler or a data manager, and they would work on set, usually in the back of a truck, and they would work in collaboration with a DIT. Now, that's fine. You can do the same sort of work. The issue with that is, there's going to be overtime in that if you want to get everything done the same day. Writing LTOs is quite a difficult thing to do because they're fairly slow. So often they need to run through into the night. And also, it's not necessarily the best environment to be QCing in. If you think of back of, some camera trucks, they're light, they're dirty, they've got people moving gear in and out all the time. If you're going to do a proper QC, you need to be in a controlled environment.
There was a quick question about how long after wrap is the DIT still working to wait for the OK, but presumably they just do that the following morning?
Yes, exactly. So the expectation generally would be the DIT wakes up in the morning at 6:30, 7 o'clock. There's an email waiting for them to say, you can reuse this, this, and this mags. They'll then go on set, wipe the mags, hand them back to the loader to be reused.
And here's a good one. What's the average data amounts from this show per day?
I can't remember.
No, nor can I. It's quite easy to find out by going onto the Venice calculator, and you can enter all the variables in there and get your data amount. But
it also gives you an idea that they were using 2 terabyte drives.
Yes.
So I would suggest that if they're making 2 drops a day, they're not shooting more than 4 terabytes a day, because that's how we would generally do it. One shuttle drive at lunch, 1 shuttle drive in the evening. But we are talking, terabytes worth of footage. And over the course of a shoot, a typical TV show would rack up to the region of sort of 80 to 150 terabytes, something like that. It is about sort of typical for a high-end TV drama. There's no typical, but
no, and it's so dependent on how they're capturing, and it we've done shows that are longer and capturing crazy amount of footage. We've had sort of 250 terabytes, 300 terabytes worth of data. So yeah, it's very, very dependent on so many things.
Yeah.
Does the way you format the cards vary depending on the camera you're shooting on?
Yes, yeah, it does. It depends on the card reader and what the manufacturer recommends. Generally, you're putting the mag back into a card reader and erasing from however the manufacturer recommends. So I'm conscious we're sort of storming through time. We'll skip. The only thing to say about hard drive, there's a lot to say about hard drives. It's not the most interesting subject, but when we're talking about sort of data managing, it's about speed, connection, and getting good quality stuff. So if you come away with anything from this, it is write your reports and buy good quality hard drives. What we recommend is G-Tech and Lacey. They have done, very well for us over the last 10 years. I never particularly care which of each one we use. They're both high-end professional products. What we hate to see is people coming along with little thumb drives or some sort of cheap hard drive that's not of a professional grade. And the way that I always tell people is, if you think you're spending, £200,000-300,000 a day on a high-end TV drama show, every penny of that you've spent is going onto these hard drives. You might only have 2 or 3 of them, but if you're going to buy cheap drives, what you're saying is, that data is not that important, and drives do fail. So I would look at only buying sort of higher-end professional drives.
Couple of things. Is it the lab that's giving the clearance to wipe your RAID on set?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So what we had there on that workflow was a rolling RAID, and it's very dependent on how the DP works with the DIT. A lot of the time, the DP will want to keep certain reference shots. So they might say, this is an important scene, can you just keep that footage? So that if he or she needed to come back to it, the DIT could then throw up that footage on set and go, well, this is what you shot in full quality. So generally what we say is a rolling RAID will last around 2 weeks, something like that on set. And the DIT then has the ability to store particular certain stuff. And
then what file system is the most robust?
So we're coming on to that when we just talk about checksums now.
And then in terms of who supplies the drives, we, from our point of view as a company, we try to you know, we make sure that the production are buying them new, whether that's through us or through someone else, it doesn't matter, but it's about having new drives as their masters, not reused ones.
Absolutely. And these things don't cost that much. You know, they are, the cost of drives has come down and down and down. So there is no excuse not to be buying, you know, proper, you know, G-Tech and Lacey products. And we are not sponsored or paid for by G-Tech and Lacey. So we touched on checksumming there, and we'll talk just very briefly about it. So the idea of a checksum is that what you need is some sort of software to make sure that every single byte of information is moved from the mag to your hard drive. The bit of checksum software we use is called Yoyotta. There are others out there. There's SilverStack, there's Shotput Pro, there's Hedge. We've used Yoyotta, you know, for 10 years. We've tried them all. We think it's, you know, just very simple, very robust. The thing I love about Yoyotta is you pay once. It's something like £160 a license, and that's it. Whereas with something like SilverStack, you have to pay annually. It's not to say SilverStack isn't a good product, because it has a lot more features. But what we want from a checksum software is simply transferring your data from the mag to our hard drive, and then everything else for us is done in Resolve, which is the daily software we use. So what that does, by moving every single byte, it goes back and forward and checks that every single byte has been moved across, and then gives you basically a certificate, a little hash certificate at the end that says this was moved from this drive to this drive at this time, and it was done correctly. And there are two standards, MD5 and XX hash. These, I can't remember who, you know, they're usually designed by sort of either the military or government or banks who need to move data and be absolutely assured that that data has moved from one location to another. And we've jumped on the back of that. And that's what we use to prove that everything's moved across. So every single time we move data in a workflow, it is always done via Yoyotta, which is our preferred checksum software. So it doesn't matter which software you use, you've got to use checksumming to make sure that it's across. And as I said at the beginning, that means that in 6 months, a year's time, if someone comes back and says, there was a corruption, I'm missing this file, you can go back and find that little checksum certificate and say, no, look, roll Z15 was transferred on this date at this time. This proves that it was done correctly. Something must have happened further down the line. And if everyone down the workflow is using checksum software, then it means that errors can be traced back to exactly where they happened. We've sort of talked about QCing, about being in good environments, and that's about having, you know, a controlled environment, having the right equipment. So we tend to use Sony OLEDs and Flanders OLEDs and LCDs. So they are high-end, fairly expensive monitors. They're not necessarily full color critical monitors, because they are very expensive, though we do have a suite of those. We keep those for our post-production work. But you know, if you're coming into the industry, it's about understanding what your limitations are. So you can do QCing on just a laptop screen, you can do QCing on an external cheaper monitor, but you need to understand you might not be seeing everything, you might not be seeing the colors correctly, you might not be seeing the resolution correctly, and that can mask problems. So that's really important. So the ideal setup is a good, powerful, usually Mac, because most of our software is Mac based, and then an external broadcast quality monitor. Lots of different ones out there. Most DITs tend to use Sony or Flanders monitors, and that's what you'll be doing your QCing on. Importantly, the monitor needs to be calibrated. That's a whole nother can of worms there, but we have to set a standard, and generally on set, that's going to be Rec 709, or if we're doing HDR work, that's going to be P3. And those standards mean that we are looking at the footage the same every single day, and that should someone else look at that footage on a calibrated monitor, they will see it the same as you saw it. So that's really important when it comes to QCing.
Just a quick question. Do you have a custom file structure per show or a basic template you use and build upon depending on production requirements?
So a really good question. It's very dependent on the complexity of the workflow and how the DIT wants to work. So generally, we do have a preferred means of using. So what we tend to have is we will have a top folder with day in it. So we'll have shoot day. In fact, why don't I show you? So we will have shoot day 001, and then we'll always put the date 13/2020. So that will be our main folder, and then in that folder we will have original camera negative, OCN. We will have sound. We will have reports. We'll have ALEs, CDLs, and that sounds about it. So we're putting all of our camera negative in here. So in our OCN folder, we're going to have everything. So each of our mags, so A1, A2, A3, so on. Our reports will be all of our Yoyotta reports. So all of our verifications that everything was done right, as well as all of our QC reports. Sound is our sound stuff. CDLs will be all of our color information for that day. And our ALEs are, ALEs can do a whole load of stuff, but they are small metadata files that can be transferred across to editorial or back to a lab or back on set. So that's generally how we tell people to do it, is have a top level day folder, and then you can transfer that entire day onto an LTO or a shuttle drive. And that's how we tend to work.
And then I'm a bit confused about this next question, which says role and file labeling protocol, HDR ? Rec 2020 ?
So they sound like sort of two different questions. So in terms of role names,
right? Okay, there's three questions.
I think so. So in terms of role names, we're going to have each of our cameras is going to be labeled A, B, C, and so on. We'll always start from role 1 and continue that for the entire run of the show. So A1, A2, A3, A4, and that will go all the way up. So on long-running shows, we can get up to A300, 350, whatever that is. And every time a new camera comes on set, we will give that a new letter designation. So on long-running shows with lots of different like GoPro cameras and a drone and an underwater and an aerial, you know, we'll have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it'll go all the way down. There are a few numbers we skip out. We skip O, we skip I, we skip V for different sort of reasons. But that's how the naming convention works. And a DIT would never change the name of anything. Even if there's been a problem, what we want to make sure is that everything can be relinked to later on down the line. And if we start changing file names, it might not get changed correctly in the metadata, which means there could be an upset when we come to relinking. In terms of our color space and HDR work, we are in 90% of TV dramas at the moment. We're working in Rec 709. There is a slow move towards HDR. We've done a couple of shows in HDR, but still the majority of the time on set, we're going to be working in SDR in Rec 709. Now, in the next couple of years, I can see that shifting quite quickly, but I suspect editorial will stay in an SDR world for quite a long time to come. So our work as a DIT or a data wrangler on set will be primarily Rec 709 based.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I think that's good.
So the last thing, very interesting, paperwork. So it sounds, you know, tedious and dull, and it is fairly tedious and dull, but making sure that your paperwork is in order could not be more important to a show and to your success as a technician. So I won't go through them particularly here, but what I've got here listed, and we'll send this around to people afterwards, is everything that you need to make sure as a DIT or as a data wrangler that you do. So the left-hand side is everything you need, and the right-hand side is where it should be sent. So this is an example. These reports are saved in Dropbox. If that's approved, we're going to put them to LTO. We'll send all the reports to the studio, and then they get sent to Digital Orchard to back everything up. Don't feel like if you're on a show you need to send us all your reports, unless you're doing it with us, of course. So then the last thing to talk about, which is slightly more broad, is about finding more information and career progression. So we talk to, not quite hundreds, but tens of people every year looking to come on board with us. And so we've got quite an interesting insight as to sort of what works, what doesn't work, what's attractive to, to us, and what works on set. And maybe, Sam, you can talk to that in a second, but just looking here about where to find more information. So again, we'll send this around. These are all lots of different places you can find a lot of information, technical information, sort of connection points. So the sort of ones I would highlight there are things like the BSc Club and the GBCT are two organizations that are fantastic about getting sort of new talent through, people who want to progress. And, it's important to remember that a DIT is in the camera department. And so, sorry, a DIT and a data wrangler, data manager are all in the camera department. So your HOD is a DOP. So the BSc Club is great for going to meet people and other technicians. And GBCT both run training courses, but also have regular meetups. And they're a great sort of source of information. And of course, Skillset, fantastic source of information, but because you're all on here, you hopefully know that. The other thing is about getting in touch with DITs that are working. So, go online, look at, high-end TV shows that are shooting at the moment, go and find their credits and get in touch with those technicians. With Facebook and LinkedIn, it's so easy to be in touch with people. And people like, to be flattered. They like to be, talked to and to give advice. So, most people that I know will be happy to sort of give advice. It's about not pestering, but just, asking politely. The other thing before I sort of hand over to Sam in terms of career stuff is about rental houses. Lots of them have got schemes for people to go and sort of spend a couple of weeks there. I know Panavision have run one for a long time. So getting in touch with people like that and saying, I want to come and work on the camera floor for a couple of weeks as a trainee or as an apprentice, I can't remember what they call them. What that means is you'll get to look at all these different cameras. Panavision has the absolute range of every camera available, and you'll get hands-on experience with all of them. So it's about continually getting that knowledge.
So one very specific question on any further reading on monitor calibration that you could recommend. I don't know. Yeah,
what I would suggest is go look at the manuals of the software. So the two big bits of software are Light Illusion and Calman. So we've used Calman for a number of years. Just go online, download the Calman instruction manual. It sounds tedious, but if you read the instruction manual, it'll tell you what all the things do. And lots of the software you can get trials for as well. So yeah.
So yeah, there was another question which I'll sort of try and speak a bit more about, which was that the large jump in responsibility between being a data wrangler and a DIT, and whether or not there's sort of intermediate stages. And so this also ties in really with, where do you get training? How do you become a DIT? All of that kind of thing. So there is a large jump in responsibility, and like any of these positions, it's really about experience, amount of time spent on set, and just sort of widening your knowledge base also in terms of the software and things like that. That's one side of it, but it really is more about sort of being able to troubleshoot and problem solve on set, and how you get that is through experience and as much of it as possible. So we are believers as a company of your best way to learn is by being on set, no matter in what capacity that is. So as a trainee, as a DIT trainee specifically, you can, that there is a sort of DIT assistant type level, which is more on the high-end features than the high-end TV dramas, because it's all about really what people can afford, what the productions can afford, or they want to spend their money on. And so at that point, a DIT assistant would be learning how to be a DIT and probably won't be touching the data at all, which is what the lab, the dailies lab, would be doing. So, but there are so many different ways in. You know, you can shadow someone in a dailies lab. You can be a dailies lab assistant. You can be a DIT trainee or a data trainee. So there are different ways of doing it, and it's about sort of stepping up through those different levels on set to really get as much experience in all the different areas as you possibly can. I don't know if that helps at all. But in terms of sort of what we do, we're always open to people contacting us. We try to see or speak to, at least in this current climate, anyone who comes to us, wanting to have further information, but also people who want to sort of get involved in the department. And if we have capacity, we do our best to sort of bring you on if we feel that you've got the right basic skill set to continue. But I would say it's really all about you and the amount of that you can do to push yourself forwards. The more time spent on set, the better. But yeah, feel free to contact us. Digital Orchard has got a website, so you can find our contact details there.
I think the only other sort of thing I would say on that is be slightly wary of, if what you're looking to be as a DIT or a data wrangler, there are a number of sort of not quite rogue companies out there, but there are a number of companies sort of pushing training for this, and they're often run by people who have never been on set and never had sort of real world experience. They tend to be fairly expensive courses, and certainly none of the technicians that have come to us or have ever done any of those sort of things. It's about getting real life sort of on-set experience. So it shouldn't be costing you hundreds of pounds to learn of this sort of stuff. What you need is access just to the right people.
Yeah, and you can learn the software quite easily if you're that way inclined. If you understand computers, you can learn the software in your own time whenever you want. You don't, that's the sort of the easy part. The hard part is sort of being on set, and that's why we're big believers in just getting out there and doing it from a trainee level, and learning on the job.
And if you really want to progress quickly, live in Wales. There is so much work going on in Wales, not literally right now, but there's so much high-end TV drama work going on in Wales that, everyone has been struggling to crew locally. And we've done quite a lot to try and, push that forward. But honestly, it's something to consider.